Good morning, everyone. We are now Mishnah Chala, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Zayin, Mishnah 7. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. Okay, so we learned a while ago that the only grain that if you make a dough from that grain that you have an obligation to separate challah is a dough made from the 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, spelts, and rye. Now the Mishnah is going to tell us something very interesting about this. If you make a dough from wheat and from rice, it's a combination. If the dough has the taste of grain, meaning let's say the wheat, will be obligated in challah. And a person can fulfill his obligation on Pesach for matzah. Dough, the mitzvah of hafrashas chav, separating challah, is only a dough from the 5 grains, and matzah can only be made from the 5 grains in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So if you have this dough, that's a combination of wheat flour and rice flour, and the taste of the dough and the taste of the bread, right? The taste of the dough is going to be the taste of the grain, of the wheat, then that dough will be obligated in challah. We see it as a wheat dough. And if we see it as a wheat dough, you can also you can make matzah out of it and fulfill your mitzvah. Now, the Bartanura points out some very, very interesting things about this idea. You know, the point here is that in this combination of the wheat flour and the rice flour, the Mishnah is saying if it tastes like wheat, we consider it wheat. That is going to be true even if the majority of the flour used for this dough is rice, where typically we would say when you have such a mixture of 2 different things that the minority becomes nullified to the majority. It doesn't have its own character. And typically we would have said, and we could have said here, if there's a majority of rice flour to wheat flour, so this is not wheat flour anymore, this is rice flour. But we don't say that. If the taste of the wheat flour is there, then we don't say that the wheat flour becomes nullified. Not only that is it not nullified, but we actually see the whole dough now as wheat. If it has the taste of the wheat flour, of the wheat, we see it all as wheat. And therefore, another point is, we've learned that to have the obligation to separate challah, your dough has to be made from 1 1/4 kav of flour. In this case, we say that let's say of the wheat flour, you don't have 1 1/4 kav. You only have a total of 1 1/4 kav of flour with the rice flour. Nonetheless, if this dough has the taste of wheat, then we say that the rice flour is seen as wheat, and it combines to make the minimum amount of 1 1/4 kav of flour to have an obligation of challah. That's how far this goes. There is a principle of tam ki'ikr, that taste is considered substance. And based on that principle, not only is the wheat flour, if it's the minority, not going to be nullified to the majority, but it's actually going to make that the flour, the wheat, the rice flour, which can be the majority, is now considered wheat flour. It takes on the characteristic of wheat flour to the point that it could actually complete the amount of 1 1/4 kav of flour for the obligation of challah. That's how far this goes. The fact that now the dough has the taste of the wheat turns the entire thing into a wheat dough, and therefore be an obligation of challah. Therefore, there'll be an obligation of a challah. And if you want to use this to make matzahs, you can do it because it's all considered wheat flour. And therefore, they can make matzah out of it. But the Mishnah continues, if it doesn't have the taste of the grain, of the wheat, will not be obligated in challah, nor will a person fulfill his obligation on Pesach. So here, if the flavor of the wheat flour cannot be tasted, we follow the general rule that the minority ingredient is nullified in a mixture. Okay? Therefore, the wheat, which is a minority ingredient, is nullified in the mixture, and the dough is viewed as if it is made entirely of rice. Okay, so The majority is rice. The minority is going to be nullified. And not only is it going to be nullified in regard to its nullification, to go as far as to say that if, let's say, I have enough wheat flour in here alone, I have 1 1/4 kav of wheat flour in this dough. That means I have the shear, I have the amount that is obligated in challah. We don't say, well, that amount is chayiv in challah. Even that amount, because it's the minority and the taste is not there, becomes nullified to the majority of the wheat of the rice flour, and the whole thing takes on the characteristic of rice flour. So even the amount of wheat flour that's there, that has the amount to be chayiv, has the amount to be obligated in separation of challah, we look at it as rice flour, and the entire dough is exempt from challah, and you cannot make matzah from it. We continue with the laws of Lashon Harah, Klal Yud, chapter 10, Sif Hey, paragraph 5. If you see someone speak Lashon Harah about someone, that's also from the sins between a man and his fellow Jew. We've been saying until now, if you see him do it, it's clear to you that he did it, he hasn't made up for it, and all the seven conditions are going to be fulfilled. You can tell other people about it. If all the conditions mentioned before are fulfilled, you can tell other people about this terrible thing that this person did. Again, it has to be for constructive purpose, in case to help the person who was spoken about, or to instill in people how bad this is to do. This is something you mentioned yesterday in a footnote. This is not going to help unless otherwise, meaning anyway, the person who was spoken about knows that that other person spoke Lashon Harah about him. Meaning the person who was spoken that this person spoke Lashon Harah about. You saw Reuben speak Lashon Harah about Shimon. Shimon has to know that Reuben spoke Lashon Harah about him, in order to be able to say that you who heard Reuben speak about Shimon, to go tell others that Reuben spoke Lashon Harah. But if, let's say, he doesn't know about it yet, then you're not allowed to tell it over even to others. The because one person has a friend and he has a friend, meaning you have to consider the fact it's going to spread. And eventually it's going to be revealed to the person who was spoken about. And that falls under what we call rechilas. As I mentioned to you yesterday, rechilas is the term used. Lashon Harah is a term when Reuven speaks badly about Shimon to Levi. He tells Levi about the things that Shimon did wrong. Rechilas is where Reuven tells Shimon what Levi did to him. That's rechilas. And that's the problem here, because at the end, by you telling people that Reuben spoke Lashon Harah about Shimon, people will eventually tell Shimon that Reuben spoke Lashon Harah about you. That's rechilas. And all the more so, you shouldn't tell the person who Lashon Harah was spoken about. Even if your intention, as we said before, is to stand up for the truth, nonetheless, there's rechilas gemura. At the end of the day, that is absolute rechilas. Even in a case where a lowlife ridicules the most important person of the Jewish people, and it's your father or it's your Rebbe, nonetheless, you may not tell it to that person. That would be rechilas. So therefore, although telling it to other people could fall under to constructive purpose, it won't necessarily do that for the person who was spoken about. The person who was spoken about, if he finds out what someone said about him, is just going to be hurt. It's not going to have any constructive purpose towards him. If there are cases that it does. But the point is that where it could be constructive, telling other people, having the person who was spoken Lashon about find out about it is not going to be constructive from his point, and therefore that would be rechilas. And in those situations, you may not tell it over to other people, even if all the other conditions were met. Have a wonderful day.